Ren Abando is reminding everyone exactly what happens when a Gilas caliber frontline is fully loaded. Right now, Abando is playing with a level of energy that is impossible to ignore. On defense, he's flying around the floor, challenging shots, switching quickly, and making plays that can completely change the momentum of a game. And on offense, his athleticism is even more obvious. One moment, he's attacking the basket. The next, he's rising above defenders for a highlight reel finish. This is the kind of two-way impact Gilas Pilipinas can desperately use. But there's something even more interesting about Abando's recent form. Why did he leave Gilas? For a while, there were reports suggesting that Abando simply didn't show up for national team training. That created questions about his commitment and his relationship with the program. But Abando eventually gave his side of the story in an interview, and his explanation painted a very different picture. According to Abando's account, he felt like he was being treated more as a temporary option than as a real part of the national team's plans. He wasn't even called up for practice in the way he expected. And that revelation changes the conversation completely. Because while the Gilas program has been dealing with lineup problems, Abando has continued to prove that he can be an explosive weapon on both ends of the floor. And now, as he prepares with the Anyang JungKwanJang Red Boosters for the upcoming KBL season, one question becomes impossible to ignore. Could a player like Ren Abando be exactly what Gilas needs when its frontline is finally complete? The answer starts with what Abando brings that is difficult to teach: pure defensive energy. At his best, Abando can pressure the perimeter, close out on shooters, and use his speed to recover when a defensive rotation breaks down. His leaping ability gives him another advantage, because even when an opponent appears to have a clean look, Abando can still get back into the play. That relentless effort is what makes his game so dynamic. And then there is the offensive side. Abando doesn't need the ball in his hands on every possession to make an impact. He can attack gaps, run the floor, cut toward the basket, and turn transition opportunities into instant highlights. When he gets space, his athleticism can completely change the way a defense has to react. That's why his performances for the Anyang JungKwanJang Red Boosters deserve attention. He isn't simply trying to put up numbers. He's building momentum heading into another KBL season, and every strong performance adds to the argument that he remains a valuable piece for Philippine basketball. But Abando's story is only one part of the bigger Gilas problem. Coach Tim Cohn's system has shown what it can look like when the right pieces are available. The Philippines has produced stretches of impressive basketball, with the team showing enough talent and depth to compete at a high level. The problem comes when key players are unavailable. Suddenly, the rotations become thinner. The size advantage disappears. Defensive assignments become harder to cover, and the team loses options offensively. That issue became particularly important during major international windows, when Gilas had to deal with an incomplete core. And this brings us back to Kai Sotto. Sotto's continued development has made his situation even more important. The biggest change in his game is not simply his size. It's his growing ability to handle physical play inside the paint without being easily moved away from his position. For a national team trying to build a stronger frontline, that matters enormously. Because when you combine a mobile big like Kai with athletic wings like Abando, suddenly Gilas has a very different defensive identity. But there is still one major question hanging over the entire roster, and it goes far beyond one player. What happens when the old guard starts stepping away? That may be the biggest challenge facing Gilas Pilipinas right now. The national team cannot depend forever on the same core that carried Philippine basketball through previous generations. As veterans such as Mar Fajardo and Japeth Aguilar approach the later stages of their national team careers, the responsibility gradually shifts toward the next group. And that transition makes the development of players like Kai Sotto, AJ Edu, Kevin Quiambao, and the rest of the young frontline even more important. But there is another piece to this puzzle: how the Samahang basketball in Pilipinas chooses to manage its players. Talent alone doesn't guarantee continuity. A player can be available, motivated, and performing at a high level, but if the national team cannot consistently bring its best players together, the system will always be forced to adjust. That's where the Abando situation becomes particularly interesting. His story raises a larger question about how Gilas should handle players who may not always be part of the immediate plans. If a player is viewed as a temporary option rather than a long-term piece, that can affect how he sees his own role. And if communication breaks down, even talented players can end up outside the national team rotation. A stronger structure could help prevent that. One possible solution is creating clearer commitments and more stable arrangements with players and their clubs. A fair contract or compensation structure could potentially make it easier for key players to prioritize national team duty when international windows arrive. Of course, that's easier said than done. Club obligations, league schedules, player development, and national team competitions all have to fit together. And the Philippines has repeatedly faced the challenge of bringing its strongest possible roster together at the right time. Now look at the big man situation. If Mar eventually moves away from regular Gilas duty, the Philippines cannot simply replace him with one player. His size, experience, rebounding, physical presence, and familiarity with the system represent a unique combination. That's why the emergence of Kai Sotto and AJ Edu matters so much. Sotto gives Gilas legitimate size and a different interior option. Edu provides athleticism and defensive mobility. Quiambao adds another layer of versatility. And then there is Angelo Kouame. At around 6'11", Kouame brings the kind of physical presence that could give the Philippines another powerful option around the paint. His strength and size make him an intriguing part of the conversation surrounding the future Gilas frontline. But his status as a potential naturalized or local player remains an important factor in determining exactly how the national team can use him. And that is where the bigger picture comes into focus. Gilas doesn't lack talent. The real challenge is putting that talent together consistently. Because imagine a lineup where the frontline has size, athleticism, defensive mobility, and scoring options, and the wings are attacking every possession with the kind of energy Abando brings. That is a completely different Gilas team. And perhaps that's the real lesson from Abando's recent performances. The Philippines doesn't simply need stars. It needs a system that can keep its best players connected to the national team. Because when the pieces finally come together, Gilas can look far more dangerous than the results of any single tournament might suggest. And Kai Sotto's next move could make that future even more interesting. So, where does Gilas Pilipinas go from here? The answer may not be about finding one superstar to solve every problem. It may be about building a deeper, more consistent core, and making sure the best players are actually available when the biggest games arrive. Ren Abando represents one part of that equation. His athleticism, defensive intensity, and ability to create spectacular plays make him a valuable weapon. Kai Sotto represents another. His continued development gives Gilas a legitimate interior presence for the next generation. AJ Edu, Kevin Quiambao, and other emerging players could also become increasingly important as the veteran core gradually changes. But none of it matters if the pieces cannot come together. That's the real challenge for the SBP and Gilas Pilipinas, creating an environment where players understand their roles, clubs, and the national team can work together, and the country can consistently field its strongest possible roster. Because when Gilas is complete, the team looks different. More athletic, more versatile, more dangerous, and perhaps most importantly, more capable of defending at a high level while still creating explosive plays on offense. Abando's story is therefore bigger than one player or one highlight. It is a reminder of how much talent Philippine basketball has, and how important it is to keep that talent connected. The next chapter for Gilas could depend on it. And if players like Abando and Sotto continue developing at this pace, the future of Philippine basketball could become very interesting. The question now isn't whether Gilas has enough talent. It's whether Gilas can finally bring all that talent together.